Well, Casey, we've got a very exciting guest with us today. Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, is here to talk about something new that they've been working on.
Yeah, and I am so excited about this, Kevin, because it actually is kind of in the dead center of my own interests as somebody who has a website on the internet.
And Casey, because we are talking about AI in this segment, we should talk about our disclosures.
That's right, Kevin. Well, my boyfriend works for the notorious AI scraping company Anthropic.
And my employer, the New York Times, is suing OpenAI and Microsoft over alleged copyright violations related to the training of large language models. So Cloudflare, for those who may remember our last podcast with Matthew, is sort of the plumbers and bouncers of the internet, right? They make a lot of these security services like DDoS protection that many, many websites rely on to keep their services safe. They also do a host of other security and data-related things. And Matthew is a sort of diehard supporter of the internet. And so a couple years ago, when all these AI bots started scraping the internet to feed data into their models, he and Cloudflare got really nervous about this. And so they have been doing a lot of interesting things to try to preserve what they see as the heart of the internet. And recently they made a lot of waves by announcing that Cloudflare would start to introduce default blocking of these AI data scrapers, basically preventing AI companies from automatically being able to exploit and scrape the data from the websites that they're visiting. This is a step that he said would help to protect content creators like you online.
Yeah, and so I'm excited to talk to him about that. And also, Kevin, just about some of the research that Cloudflare has been doing into the state of the web as a whole. You know, you and I have both been worried about what the rise of AI means for the internet in general. Cloudflare has taken a close look at that and has some interesting things to say.
Yeah, it's one of the sort of more underappreciated companies on the internet. Their decisions about even seemingly small things can have enormous ripple effects throughout the industry. So I thought it was a really good time to bring on Matthew and ask him some questions about what they're doing and why.
Well, let's bring him in.
Matthew Prince, welcome back to Hard Fork.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about AI and scraping and all the steps that you're taking to sort of protect the internet. But before we describe the solution that you're proposing, which you announced on something called Content Independence Day, I want to ask you to describe the problem. You had some pretty shocking numbers in your post on this about how much internet traffic patterns have already changed as a result of AI. So talk a little bit about those and why you felt the need to do something about it.
Sure. So, at Cloudflare, we sit in front of north of 20% of the web. So we see a lot of what's happening online. And we understand, I think, a lot of how the web works and the business model that exists behind it. And 25 years ago, basically Google struck a deal, an implicit deal with publishers, which was you let us copy all of the content that you're creating, and in exchange, we'll send you traffic. And the whole web, the economy of the entire web was really built on that search-based interface. However, over the last 10 years, Google has changed what that interface looks like. It started sort of subtly, starting about 8 years ago when they introduced the answer box. And the answer box is if you type in something like, when did Cloudflare launch? Instead of you having to go to 10 blue links, it just says September 27th, 2010. And that was a pretty radical change because back in the day, Larry and Sergey used to brag about how their job was to get people off Google.com as quickly as possible, right? They even measured the time up in the corner to show you just how fast you basically were, leaving their site. And now all of a sudden, Google was keeping you on the site. More recently, they've introduced something that's AI overview. So if you do a search most of the time now, an overview shows up, which is an AI summary of what's going on. And that has made a big difference in how much traffic goes to content creators from
How
search.
much of a difference? Like, put some numbers on that.
Yeah. So if you take 10 years ago as the sort of the standard and you compare it with today, it's almost 10 times harder to get traffic today for a piece of content than it was 10 years ago. And it's gotten significantly worse just since the introduction of AI Answer Box. That's just with Google, and that's the good news. If you look at the AI companies, OpenAI is 750 times harder, Anthropic is 30,000 times harder. What's basically happening is as the interface of the web is shifting from search to AI, people are consuming derivatives, not originals. Basically, they're not following the footnotes. And we've actually seen it get even worse as people are actually trusting the AI systems more because the AI systems are getting better. And what scares us about that is that there are really three reasons people create content. Maybe not you, Kevin, but one is
vanity
is ego,
is mine.
vanity,
Yes.
ego, right? But that's a big thing. There's a whole bunch of content that's just created, for just the ego and the fame of doing it. But the business model is you either sell subscriptions or you sell ads or both of those things. And so the value has to be either make people famous or make them rich through ads or subscriptions. That is what has built the web over the last 25 years. The problem is that publishers are struggling already at 10 times harder. I worry that as more and more of the interface of the web looks like OpenAI or Anthropic, they're dead at 750 times and they're buried in the ground and forgotten about it 30,000 times. And so if that's the case, if there's not an incentive for people to create content, I think people will stop creating content, and that really is an existential threat to the web.
Okay, that's a pretty good and concise description of the problem. So what is the solution here? What are you all doing?
Well, so I don't pretend to know exactly what the solution is, but I know kind of some of the aspects of how we have to get there. So the answer has to be that AI companies have to pay for content. The deal is different than it used to be with search. Search, they copied your content, and in exchange they sent you traffic that you could monetize. If now they're copying your content, they're not sending you anything, then why would you give them their content in the beginning? So AI companies have to pay for content. And I think what's encouraging is we're actually seeing some AI companies that are doing that. Amazon just announced a deal with the New York Times. OpenAI has done a number of content deals that are out there. But the problem with a lot of those deals that we realized was Sam at OpenAI can't be a sucker. He can't pay for content and then have all of his competitors get it for free. Or another way of thinking this is you can't have a market unless you have some level of scarcity. And so what we thought the first step was, and what we announced on July 1st in conjunction with the who's who of the world's publishers, was we're going to, by default, block the ability for AI crawlers to get content unless they are compensating the content creators for getting that content. And we think that that's super important. Now, exactly how the compensation works, again, I think there's a lot of different models. I analogize it to, and at risk of hubris, when Apple announces, the introduction of iTunes, 99 cents a song, right? That wasn't what the final business model was. The final business model that we've kind of come to is more like Spotify, where it's $10 a month and you get kind of all you can eat from the Spotify playlist. I think we're going to take some iterations to figure out where we might start at some price, fixed price that's there, and we might evolve to something which is more like a Spotify model over time. But the first step has to be actually saying, if you're an AI company, you can't get content for free.
Now, if I'm a website operator and I want to prevent AI bots from scraping my site, I can already do that through Robots.txt. I can just put a little file in the metadata, and I can say, hey, these three crawlers you're allowed to scrape, but these other six you're not allowed to scrape. So how is what you are building with Cloudflare different than that?
Well, the first thing is with Robots.txt, the analogy would be like it's the speed limit sign, where it says, okay, you can drive 55 miles an hour, right? There's no law of physics that says you have to drive 55 miles an hour. And I think a lot of us maybe sort of look at the speed limit sign and go, it's probably 60 is okay, right? It's the same thing. It is a recommendation. It's not an actual enforcement that's there. That's problem number one. Problem number two is it's incredibly blunt in terms of what it does. So you basically have to apply it across a significant portion of your site. So you can't say, okay, let these things out, but don't let these things. The last problem is a lot of the search companies, because again, we see a huge amount of the internet, we can track how this works. A lot of the AI companies, I should say, if they hit a robots.txt file, what they then do is they find some other way to go out and scour the internet to find your same content. So they'll actually do a search against Bing and try and pull the cache content, or they'll go look at the Internet Archive, or they'll actually do things that are incredibly sneaky, like pinging ad server networks to get a description of the page that comes back to them, and try and find all kinds of things around it. We've tracked some of the sort of worst performing AI companies, and there's a huge range. Like OpenAI, they're actually the good guys here. They're doing things right. They're trying to do things the right way, but by far the best behavior. There are others that most closely resemble like North Korean hackers, where they're literally using residential proxies to spoof who they are to try to get around the various blocks. And so I think that in addition to a road sign, for the badly behaving bots, we actually need something where we say, we're going to take away your car because you keep, going 400 miles an hour down the road.
Tell us a bit how technically the solution that you've built works. How are you able to build those kind of fine-grained controls?
So Cloudflare, we're essentially a giant network, and a ton of the web sits behind us. And so it has to flow through our pipes. And our primary business for most of our history has been cybersecurity. So every day we go to war with the North Korean hackers, the Russian hackers, the Iranian hackers, the Chinese hackers who are trying to get into our customer systems one way or another. And we're really good at identifying, no matter what they pretend to be, we're really good at identifying who they are, what they're doing, and stopping them. Literally by just not letting their traffic get to our customers. What we realized, though, was that actually gave us the perfect position to be able to help anyone who is a content creator also set what were enforced rules of the road, where we can say if this bot is behaving in a bad way, that we're going to block it. So, for instance, we as we have now studied this, and we have very good evidence on what even some of the major AI companies are doing that's really sleazy, we're going to put them in timeout. We're actually going to stop their ability to access a huge portion of the web, even if they pretend that they're doing it. And we've got the records to do that, and our security teams have actually investigated and figured that out. On the other hand, when if OpenAI has done a deal, we also want to make sure that they get that content as efficiently as possible and structured in a way which is possible. So the content creator can say, I want to allow OpenAI to come to my page. I think what we'll develop over time is then what is sort of a standard rack rate, where you as a content creator, even if you're small, can say, okay, I'm happy to let this content be scraped, but here's the price for it. And that's something that, how that market will develop, I think, is going to be what, kind of the next steps of this project.
Now, you announced this new approach to AI crawlers a few weeks ago and flipped this switch that blocks all the crawlers by default. What has the reaction been from publishers, from AI companies, from people who are inside Cloudflare looking at the data?
Yeah, so, from publishers, not surprisingly, I'm on a lot more people's Christmas lists. Because publishers were really struggling with how to deal with it. They saw the problem. And they didn't have a good technical solution to be able to lock it down. They're not cybersecurity companies, so they have a harder time being able to track this. And so the glee that we've seen from publishers as they've turned the system on, seen what was going on, and then had the ability to push a button and say, disallow, 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 has been really, really palpable. And I think that's why this resonated across such a wide swath of the publisher base. What surprised me has been the reaction of the AI companies, which I kind of thought that they were just going to throw up all over this and hate it, but it hasn't been that. For the most part, with a couple of exceptions, they've said, listen, we get it. Ultimately, content is the fuel that runs our engine, and we need to pay for it. But the key is it needs to be a level playing field. And so I think that what I am encouraged by is in all the conversations that I've been a part of, the AI companies said, if you can make it a level playing field, if you can make it something that's fair, then we're willing to pay for content. And that, I think, that's a dramatic step that says that we're headed in the right direction. Now, making it fair is going to be a trick, and folks like Google, who again just believe that they've got kind of a God-given right to be able to copy everything off the web, like that's going to take some persuading to get there. But I think as the industry lines up and says this is the right thing to do, that we'll be able to even get Google to hopefully voluntarily, but if not, there's certainly enough investigations on them going on around the world that one way or another, I think that they will be persuaded or compelled to get behind this effort.
I mean, basically what you're describing is a revenue share deal, right? And it seems
right.
only logical that a company like Google, which is going to be making a lot more revenue by crawling everyone's content because they're such a source of queries, should be paying more than the upstart AI company that just shows up on day one and wants to start crawling the web. So I would hope that they would be open to that.
I think I am encouraged, and I do believe that Google really does believe in the ecosystem and they get it. But it's a little bit of the frog boiling in water, where 10 years ago or 25 years ago when Google started, it was a good deal. Like, get in the nice pot of water, you're happy, you're a frog, right? But they've slowly turned the heat up, and that's made what used to be a good deal into a much, much worse deal. And so the deal needs to get renegotiated, and that's a big piece of it. The other thing that I think is important is you need to have access to content. And that's the thing today that's cheap. But my prediction is that over time, the real differentiator between the different AI companies is who has access to the most interesting content. And we've seen this play out with things like Netflix, where you can see that by getting original content, it actually drives subscribers. And so I think that at the end of the day, it's exactly right that fundamentally what content producers should be arguing for is we should be getting a share of whatever the revenue that you're generating from users is, because we're the fuel that runs the engine that is powering your business.
I feel like you can already see this today, and Kevin, I'm sure you've seen this. Matthew, I'd be curious if you have too, but if you ever use one of these chatbots to run a deep research report because you're trying to really bone up on some a set of historical facts or recent current events that you want to write about, you get these results and half of them are from bleepbloop.com, newswire.xyz, publishers that no one has ever heard of and that you're not entirely sure are on the level. And so often when I run those searches, I think, God, I wish that the sources I trust actually did just have deals with these chatbots, or that I could log in with my Bloomberg credentials and then just have you read Bloomberg too as part of the report that you're making.
Yeah. And I think, all of those things will come, but two things. One, bleepbloop.com actually sometimes is going to have really interesting original content.
Sure.
And I think part of the key here is we don't want to create a situation where the only people who get the content deals are the major publishers. The New York Times can do a big deal with OpenAI. At the same time, you want to make sure that the small AI companies, the new startups, are able to also get access to this. So a vibrant market here is lots of sellers and lots of buyers, and you want to be able to do that.
Right. Now, you mentioned that publishers are very happy about the steps that Cloudflare has taken to block these AI crawlers, that AI companies were not as excited, understandably, but maybe they would get on board too. I did talk to one AI executive about this who basically accused you and Cloudflare of setting up a new toll booth between the AI companies and the content companies, because you are not only providing this technology, but you are sort of inserting yourselves as the merchant of record in these transactions. And this person asked me to ask you what percentage of each payment Cloudflare plans to take. So what percentage does Cloudflare plan to take from these transactions?
So first of all, if you're the New York Times and you do a deal with OpenAI, that's your deal. We don't get any of that. If we facilitate that, so if we're the ones who go out and negotiate it, then we'll take some percentage of it. And I have no idea what that will be, but I think it'll be something reminiscent of what does Spotify take of a subscriber's revenue versus what do they pay out. And usually that's sort of in the 20 to 30% range of what that is. I think the only way that we should get something is if we're actually generating value from this. And if not, then you should do the deals yourself between the AI companies and the publishers. And in that case, sure, we'll provide you the interface to be able to stop it. But that isn't something that we would take any percentage of. What's also important is we provide this at no cost to even our free users, because we think that this is fundamentally important to the sort of health of the long-term internet. It shouldn't be something that just the big companies can get access to. And so no matter who you are, if you're signing up for Cloudflare, you get these tools, you get the analytics, you get the understanding, you get the ability to block it. And again, I think that we will be less involved in the transactions for folks like the New York Times, but for bitbopbloop.com or whatever, it's probably a porn site that we're pointing people to. And you can sort of envision what it might be. But if that's the case, then yeah, I think that's a place where if we're doing work, then we should get compensated for that work.
I mean, so I have a website on the internet, platformer.news. That's where my newsletter is. And I'm super interested in this because I frankly just do not have the time or energy to go out and try to strike deals with AI companies. I also have no idea what the value of Platformer is in that particular marketplace. So if somebody wants to go like make a market and then I can just show up and you tell me like, hey, we can make you $80 this year or like whatever it is, like I'm interested. And you want to take 20% of that, sure.
And I think that feels fair. And again, hopefully we're not the only ones doing this. Like from my perspective, personally, like my wife and I own a small newspaper in our hometown. We see how hard and how important it is to have local news. And there's got to be a business model to it. Like that reporters need to eat. It costs money to print papers. Like you have to have a business model that's there. I think personally, we've built a $60 billion company on the back of the internet. Like I feel an enormous responsibility to give back to the internet and actually protect it. Our mission is to help build a better internet. If you talk to anyone at Cloudflare, that's why they work for us. And so like with all due respect to the AI executive, they've built an entire company by stealing content creators' content and not compensating them for that. And if they keep doing that, people will stop creating content, which not only kills the internet, but kills them in the process.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who would agree with you. One of them is not President Trump. He said just last week in connection with some new AI policy rollouts that he was doing, he basically took the side of the AI companies and said that they shouldn't have to pay for copyrighted material. He said, quote, "You can't be expected to have a successful AI program when every single article, book, or anything else that you've read or studied you're supposed to pay for. It's not doable." So, I guess what is the incentive for an AI company to agree to something like a pay-per-crawl system if the current administration is signaling that they're not going to face any penalty for just breaking copyright the old way?
Yeah, and I think like many things that sometimes come out of the Trump administration, nuance is a little bit lost here. We've actually talked with a number of people in the Trump administration, and I think what they are concerned about is much more a government-instituted kind of you must pay X in the way that we've seen come out of Australia and the way that we've seen come out of Canada. I think that's what they're trying to signal that they're not in favor of. They are very much in favor of, as far as we can tell, private market solutions where that is created. And so again, I think the incentive for the AI company is you need content in order to have access to build your tools, and we've just stopped you from getting it. And so regardless of what the law says, we're going to be able to technically stop the AI companies from being able to get the content unless they're compensating the content creators for it.
I want to ask you, Matthew, about another release that you all did earlier this year related to this issue of AI crawling, which was something called the AI Labyrinth. This was a system that was designed to basically, instead of blocking AI crawlers, it would just sort of redirect them to an endless series of AI-generated links and pages, basically, trapping them in this labyrinth that they could not escape from. So my first question is, do you worry that the robots will remember that you did this to them and take their revenge?
That is not a risk factor that we have currently included in our S1, but I'll talk to our legal team about it. We now have the data that there are some AI companies, big AI companies, well-funded, that are just behaving horribly. And frankly, if they're going to behave like hackers, then we're going to behave like trolls right back to them. And we can feed enough garbage into their system that they will create garbage content. And so again, when we come back to what's the incentive, like you don't want to piss us off. Because again, we believe in the future of the internet. We believe in supporting journalists. We believe in supporting content creators. We're on the right side of history here. And so the right thing to do is say, yeah, you're spending $10 billion on GPUs. You're spending billions of dollars on employees. You should be dedicating at least something to paying for content.
Did the labyrinth work? Like, what was the result of that?
Yeah, for real, again, we try not to put, like, OpenAI, good actor. Doing great, doing all the things right. So we don't throw them.
This message was not endorsed by the New York Times legal team.
That's yes. But for bad actors, and there are bad actors out there, we can pollute their data and we can pollute it at scale.
I'm having I think entirely novel feeling of a hard fork recording where I'm feeling optimistic about the state of the media. Like every single time we talk about the internet and the media on this show, I'm like, well, it's going to be really tough, everybody. You know, batten down the hatches. The storm is here. But Matthew, you actually are giving me optimism that, you know, when someone with the right incentives, and I do feel like you have the right incentives, shows up with great technology and like the willingness to go out and make a market, maybe by hook and by crook, like we actually still will have a media industry 5 years from now.
Well, and I think again, and I might lose people because this is starting to get a little woo woo, but everything that's wrong with the world today is ultimately Google's fault. Now, that's a little strong, but Google taught us, they were the first ones to really teach us, that traffic was the deity that we all had to worship to. Mm-hmm. Now, and again, I think Google's actually been a net positive for the world massively, but Google begat Facebook, which begat TikTok, which is just kind of spiraling down in towards sort of the attention economy of how do I create a cortisol response and get people to click on my stuff so that we can sell ads to them. I think that that's the wrong direction for really furthering humanity. If, on the other hand, as we create this, if the giant block of cheese has holes in it, and we can say that if you as a creator go out there and create something that fills in one of those holes and we'll compensate you for that, we'll pay you more for it, what I'm hopeful is that we get a lot more really interesting, long-form, knowledge-generating content, which is what we all want, and the only reason we're not getting it is because all of the incentives are not how do we do great things, but how do we actually just rage bait people into clicking on links. And so I think it's super important that as we go through this, like it shouldn't just be us figuring this out. And so I've tried to spend as much time with publishers, with AI companies, we've working with some of the leading academic economists, others to sort of say, as we think about this market, how do we make sure it's as healthy as possible? Because the dark mirror version of this is not that journalists go away, not that researchers go away. It's that they're all employed by the 5 big AI companies, right? And so it's not that we're going to go back to kind of the media times of you know, the early 90s. It's that we're going to go back to the media times of like the Medicis, where, you know, you have just these 5 powerful families that control all of, you know, academia and research and journalism. And it's not actually that hard to envision. There will be a conservative one, sort of the Fox News version. There will be the liberal one. There will be the Chinese one. There will be the, you know, Europeans' attempt at one. And those will be the things that are out there, and knowledge gets consigned behind that. I don't want that to happen. And I think the key to making that not happen is figuring out how we can have a healthy market with lots of sellers of content, lots of buyers of content, and make that as robust as possible.
Yeah. Now, Matthew, I know in the past you have expressed some concerns about the power that you and Cloudflare have by virtue of, you know, sitting in front of 20% of the internet, as you say. And when we've talked before, it's been some of it has been in the context of the decisions you've made around content moderation, basically deciding whether or not to protect websites with extreme or violent content on them. You sort of famously pulled protection from 8chan, which led that site to go down after some mass shootings. I think a lot of people understood that, but you were concerned at the time that this sort of unilateral power that you had to sort of like wake up and make a big change to the structure of the internet wasn't something that maybe anyone should have. So I'm curious, like when you were deciding to sort of implement this change to push the button to block all of the AI crawlers by default, did you worry about that exercise of power and how sort of unilateral it was?
Totally. And I think we take that responsibility really seriously. But what we realized was all the publishers were sitting around saying, we're dying, we're dying, we're dying. And no one was doing anything about it. And so, like, if you're in that situation and you see something that really matters, I mean, the internet really matters, and we should be fighting for it, and we should be protecting it, and it's dying because the business model behind it is dying. And at no step have we said we're the only solution. In fact, we've tried to work with as many different, even competitors as possible to say, this is important, let's do it. And we don't pretend that we have the answer or that it won't evolve over time. But we do know that the first step in any market has to be creating scarcity. And so that's what we did on July 1st.
Got it. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for stopping by. Really interesting experiment. I'm excited to follow it and see how it plays out.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Matthew. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.